In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you 6 tips to help you deadlift back pain-free and avoid a low back injury. Coming up. Hey, what's up YouTube? It's Coach Remi here. Last week we discussed squatting and low back pain, and I shared with you 8 tips to help you perform the best squat possible back pain-free. Today we're going to be covering the deadlift, which is perhaps the most common exercise that people throw their low back out from. And I am for one guilty of that, throwing my low back out on a poorly executed deadlift several years ago, and I had to learn the hard way. In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you 6 tips that I learned since my back injury about the deadlift, and also common mistakes that I see new back pain clients make when they attempt to deadlift. And this video should give you a bit of insight into my deadlift assessment process. Now, before we begin, just keep in mind that back pain can be caused by a multitude of factors, and if you're uncertain what is causing your back pain, please seek out a medical professional to rule any sinister causes and to get a proper diagnosis. Not everyone is going to be able to perform the deadlift back pain-free to begin with, and they may need to wind down their symptoms first before they can actually perform the motion involved in a deadlift pain-free. With that being said, as long as you guys are aware of that and understand that, let's jump into today's video, and let's go. For tip number 1, we're going to discuss one of the most common mistakes that people make on the deadlift, and that is lifting with a rounded back. And it's for this reason that so many people end up with a back injury. So, when it comes to performing the deadlift, what you will see people do is when they get down to the bar, they will literally round their back here, and they will lift with this rounded back position. Now, the spine is in a very vulnerable position by being bent like that, and as we lift load and go through that motion, because what we're doing there is we're mimicking the mechanism for creating a disc herniation. So, if we do enough cycles of that over time, and we lift with that posture, and we go through that motion and factor in load, it's only a matter of time until someone herniates a disc. So, to avoid this, we need to get someone to get into a proper position and maintain a proper position throughout the lift as performing that motion. So, the way I coach the deadlift, just to quickly run through it, is tell someone to keep their shins close to the bar, feet about hip width apart, but it's going to depend on the person. And we may play around with things and tweak things specific to the person. But from here, knees slightly bent, making sure we're not hitting the bar with our shins. Hips back, chest tall. So a verbal cue I like to use is show me the logo on your shirt to keep the chest up. Now grab the bar, lock the lats in, so shrug down, chin tucked, and then pull the hips through. And back, lats down, chin tucked. Core tight, pop through. So, just by shrugging downwards, engaging the lats, stiffening the spine, keeping our chest up, we'll clean up a lot of people's technique right away, and it'll prevent them from falling into that rounded back posture, which is what we want to avoid at all costs on this exercise. So, that's tip number 1. Avoid lifting with a rounded back. So for tip number 2, another technical mistake that people make is they hyperextend their low back at the top of the lift. So what you'll see people do sometimes is when they get down, they'll execute a good deadlift in a good position, they'll pop forward, but what they'll do is they'll shoot their hips far forward and extend through their back. Now, doing that with the weight is going to crank on the facet joints, and it's not going to feel good for someone that already has some existing extension-based low back problems. That can either aggravate things, or someone repeats this for enough cycles over time with load, it will create one. So, to avoid that, we just need to cue a person to avoid overextending the hips. So, when you execute the deadlift, just finish with a glute squeeze here. Don't extend the back and hips forward. So that's tip number 2. Avoid hyperextension at the top of the lift on the deadlift. Tip number 3 is a lack of brace or core stiffness when performing this exercise. So what you'll see people do is they'll get into a good position, good neutral spine, but they won't properly brace. So they're not stiffening their abs. So when I'm referring to stiffening the abs, if I'm stiffening my elbow joint here, so I'm flexing my bicep as hard as I can, can't move my arm. Now, if I relax it, nice and loose and easy, and I can move it. We have to think about stiffening the spine, especially as the weight gets heavier, because we want to contract our muscles to absorb a lot of the stress, and we want to take stress off our passive restraints, such as our discs, our ligaments. So to do that, you're going to get down, shrug down, chin tucked, stiffen the abs, big breath in, hold it, pop forward with the hips. So also by taking that big breath in, that's going to help stabilize the spine as well when performing this exercise, and it's going to be especially critical as someone gets heavier with the weight and progresses with lifting. So that's tip number 3, make sure you're maintaining a proper brace and proper core stiffness throughout the lift. Now, tip number 4, we need to talk about distance of the bar. So there's 2 things to consider here. So I've got my shoes on here. So these are a pair of New Balance shoes, but as you can see, there's padding here at the bottom. Now that padding is going to add a little bit extra height to my overall frame here. So when I'm lifting the bar, or when I get down to the bar, more distance for me to get down, but also more distance for the bar to travel upwards. If I simply remove my shoes, I am now closer to the bar, not as tall. I've just made myself a little bit shorter, I should say. Now, when performing the deadlift, typically I recommend going barefoot or wearing a pair of minimus shoes, just because by keeping yourself closer to the bar doesn't have to travel as much, and it's going to give you an advantage as compared to wearing a pair of shoes that has a lot of heel support, which, for example, a basketball shoe would not be a good shoe to lift in. Second consideration here, when we talk about the distance of the bar, or the bar path, is what you will see people do is when they set up here, when they get into position here, sometimes people will kick the bar with their shin. Now the bar moves out in front, and then it's kind of torqued on the side. And what that does is now it throws the bar path to an awkward angle. So someone may have one arm a little bit out in front of the other when they're lifting. So you want to make sure the bar is close to your shins. It's not far away here, because what that does is the axis of rotation is now increasing. So this joint now needs to work more. But if we keep it closer, we make the lift easier. So distance of the bar is another consideration when performing the deadlift. Now, tip number 5, we have to also consider the style of the deadlift. There's different styles. We have conventional, which is your most common that you will see people do. But why it's important to understand conventional here, and what I want to point out here is, when you get down here, conventional typically has the greatest horizontal angle from your spine compared to a sumo style or a trap bar. So sumo style, you tend to be more upright, where conventional, you're more horizontal. And then finally, trap bar over here, you're going to be most vertical compared to sumo and conventional. So why this is important to understand, more horizontal you are, the more that you have to resist the spine rounding into flexion, and the more shear stress that's going to be created as well when compared to the sumo or trap bar. So when picking a deadlift for someone with existing back issues, maybe best to start with a trap bar deadlift and then work up to maybe sumo or conventional, because this one has a less chance of somebody falling into a flexion-based position compared to sumo or trap bar. And also, the weight is also centered around the body, whereas conventional, the weight is out in front. So it's important to consider the deadlift style, because if someone has back issues and someone's goal, whatever it is, and if they want to perform a deadlift, there may be deadlift styles that are not suitable for them, and there may be better alternatives that they should be performing or will be able to perform without maybe triggering symptoms. For my sixth and final tip, we need to discuss programming the deadlift. The deadlift is one of the most technical exercises out there, but it's also one of the most common exercises that people throw their low back out from. So we have to consider variables such as the reps, the sets, the load we're using, the type of deadlift we're using, conventional, sumo, trap bar, how often we're programming the deadlift per week, per month with somebody, and also how we're using the deadlift in the context of pairing it with other exercises. Are we putting it into a circuit and pairing it with burpees or sit-ups, or are we pairing it with something that's complementary, such as mini band side steps or a dead bug? We have to consider all those variables because any error in those variables can lead to a devastating injury if we're not careful on how we program this exercise with somebody, because it is so technical and because so many people injure themselves performing them. So that's my sixth and final tip for you guys. And that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed today's video and that these 6 tips can help you perform the best deadlift possible back pain free. Let me know in the comment section below which tip you found most helpful. Was it understanding a proper brace during the deadlift? Or was it understanding how the bar path can influence the amount of stress on your low back? Or maybe one of the other 4 tips. Let me know below, and if you haven't already checked out my video on low back pain and squatting, I highly suggest you do that. Okay guys, with that being said, that's it for today's video. Have a successful and productive day, and until next time.